Hello year 8 and welcome back to mathematics. In today's lesson we're continuing with our topic of fractions, decimals and percentages, and today we'll be actually starting to look at decimals and working with decimals. So what we want to do today in today's lesson is to begin operating with decimals. Three things we want to be able to do by the end of today's lesson. We want to be able to compare decimals and their values, convert decimals to fractions, and convert fractions to decimals. So that's what the aim of today's lesson is going to be. Now, last lesson, we started looking at fractions, and we actually looked at a few different things. So we started looking at operations with fractions. So what we did was we started working with adding and subtracting, and also multiplying and dividing with fractions. So today we're going to actually move on to decimals and do some groundwork with our decimals before we actually start doing those four operations as well. So let's have a look at this part here now. So let's firstly talk, what are decimals? Now, you probably have seen decimals before, and you might be thinking this definition is really, we don't need to know what decimals are. I'm just going to give you a quick definition anyway. So here, a decimal is a number. A decimal number are numbers that use a decimal point followed by digits to show numbers which have less value than 1. These can be used to represent the same numbers as fractions. So what decimals are another way to write numbers which are less than 1. So numbers which are part of a whole. So here I have an example to show you what decimals are, just to visualize it. Here in my diagram underneath, I've got a circle, and I've covered in, I've broken it into two parts, and I've colored in one of those two parts. Now, as a fraction, we would say that, one part out of a total of two parts have been selected. And so that's how we would represent this value, the value of this particular shaded area, as a fraction. Now we can also represent this as a decimal. So a decimal is just another way of writing these exact same values, but using a decimal point and base 10 numbers. So what we're going to do here is, instead we're going to go, okay, this as a decimal is actually 0.5. So the reason why this is actually 0.5 is because this 5 here, any number after the decimal point, represents numbers which have value less than 1. This 5 here actually represents 0.5. So here, this 5, oh, not 0.5, it represents 5/10. 5 out of 10. And so 5 out of 10 is just the same thing as a half. And so here, decimals are actually used to represent the same numbers as fractions, but just writing it in a different way. And so here, anything that's after the decimal point just represents numbers which are less than a whole. So first thing we want to be able to do is actually be able to order and compare decimals. And the way that we need to do this is by recalling the place values. So here you might remember from primary school or in year 7, you talked about place values. So when you write a number in decimal form, each of those digits have a different place value. So for example, here, I'm going to just start off and right in the middle, we've got our decimal point, and it's a big old dot. And to the left, we've got numbers which are bigger than 1. And so here, for example, the first one in this box to the left of my decimal point, that is for my units. This is my units. So this is units, so they represent ones. So this is, they represent ones. And then the next one, we go up from there. Actually, I realize I should probably move this I need to move this one to the right, my bad. Let me try this again. Ooh, decimal point. Put a dot here, and I'm just going to move these guys over across by 1. Okay, and then further up we go. We have the next one up, which is our tens, and so here we've got this is represented with tens. The next one up would be our hundreds, so our hundreds, and the final one up would be our thousands, and we could keep going. And so when you read numbers, this is those place values, this is what they represent. So this is what those numbers, this is what those individual numbers represent. So those are the place values. And so we can keep going up and up and up. And so you can go tens of thousands, you can go hundreds of thousands, you can go millions, you can go tens of millions, you can go hundreds of millions, and so on. But on the other side, Up to the right of the decimal point, we have numbers that represent, all those place values represent numbers which are smaller than 1. So smaller than 1. So here, for example, after my decimal point, the first place value, the first digit, is our tenths. And so here, this is 1/10. And then the next one is our hundredths. And this is 1/100. And the next one is our thousandths. And this is 1/1000. And we can keep going. We can go 1/10,000. We can go tens of thousandths. Oh, I can't say that word. And so on. And here, what we notice is at the bottom here, these numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller. So even though the number at the bottom of our fraction gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because we have the number at the bottom of our fraction is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, these values actually get smaller and smaller and smaller. So here, as we go from left to right, the values of each of our digits or our place values get smaller. So here's smaller in value. Okay. And so when we write a number using decimal points, each of those digits at each of those different spots represents how many of those particular things have. So for example, if I have the number 5, that means I have 5 units. If I have a number like 5.2, that means I have 5 units and 2 tenths in my number. I can go 605.26. That means I have 6 hundredths, 5 ones, 2 tenths, and then 6 hundredths. And we can continue this pattern. So for example, I have one underneath. I have 682.1437. So what this actually represents, let's just actually write this out. And I'm going to actually, because I've got 4 decimal points, I'm going to write this out to my tens of thousands. So here, instead of writing out the, I'm writing out here, tens of thousands, let me write it, 10 thousandths. We've got our thousandths. We've got our hundredths. We've got our tenths. We've got a decimal point, bigger dot, and here we've got units, we've got tens, and we've got hundreds. So when I have my number 682.1437, what this means is that in my number, I've got 6 hundredths. So here, this is going to be 6 lots of 100. And then I've got 8 lots of 10. I've got 2 lots of 1. So I'm just reading my decimal points here and I'm matching up where these fit in. I've got my decimal point. I've got 1 tenth. I've got 4 100ths. I've got 3 thousandths. And I've got 7 tens of thousandths. And so that's how we actually would write out this full number. It's breaking it down into those different place values. So where your number is in your number, where your digit is in your number, I should say it that way, they represent different place values. So here, that's how we actually write out these full numbers. Now, we can actually compare decimals by comparing the numbers. So what we want to do when we're comparing numbers is we just write it out in this kind of form. And then what we want to do is we want to read from left to right and then observe where there is numbers which are bigger than the other ones, and then we can compare those numbers. So let's have a go at an example of this. Comparing decimals. So compare the decimals and place the correct inequality sign between them. Now, inequality sign, what that just means is if one number is bigger than a number, so let's say I've got a number like 10 and 9. We know that 10 is bigger than 9, so I'm going to write this symbol. This symbol just means greater than. So what we know from here is that 10 is greater than 9. But you've also got the other way. If I've got 9 and 10, I want to compare them, I would use this symbol in the other direction. So this symbol means less than, and 9 is less than 10. And so what we want to figure out is which one of these numbers is bigger than the other one, and then just compare them and put the right symbol there. So let's have a go at these examples here. The first one, I've got these two numbers, 57.89342, and the other one is 57.89631. Okay, so let's actually just write this out using the table. And so here, I'm just going to do a really quick one. I've got my tens, I've got my units, I've got my decimal point. We'll put a dot here for both of them in a second. I've got my tenths, I've got my hundredths, got my thousandths, I've got my tens of thousands. I'm just doing a lot of shorthand here. And I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need a fifth one. I need a hundredth of thousands. Oh gosh, okay. And so let me just write out my numbers in this table form. Okay. So here, let's just write them out. So I've got, first one is 50, we've got 57.89342. So here, that would just be 5 lots of tens, 7 lots of units, 8 lots of tenths, 9 lots of hundredths, 3 lots of thousandths, 4 lots of tens of thousands, and 2 lots of hundreds of thousands. Okay, and the other number is just the same thing, but instead we're going to write from here. It's 6 thousandths. Oh, I can't say that word. 3 tens of thousandths, and one 100ths of thousandths. Okay. So from here, what we want to do is we want to compare them. We want to see which one is bigger than the other one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking from the left. I'm going to just try and see when I first see a difference between those two numbers. So here, first digit, we both got 5. So the tens, in a tens column, we both got 2 5s. So they're the same. That's okay. Next column in my units, I've got 7s. They match up. We've got a decimal point. We've got an 8 in the next column. We've got a 9 in the next column, and they all match up. And here in the thousandths column, we've got a 3 and a 6, so we can actually compare these two. So here, what we do is we go, okay, which one is bigger than the other one? Well, 6 is bigger than 3, which means that my bigger number is going to be the one at the bottom here. So this number here is bigger than the other one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write those two numbers in that order that they've given me. 57.89342 and 57.89631. So what I know is that the second number, this number is bigger than the first. So what I'm going to say is the first number is less than the second number. So that's how we answer this first question, using by looking at our place value. We just compare the two units, the two numbers, looking at the place values of each of those digits, and then compare them. Okay, next one. Let's have a go at the next one. So here, I'm just going to do the same thing. This time, I'm just going to make it a lot quicker. I'm just going to write tens. Let me try this again. Tens, units, decimal point, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, tens of thousandths. Hopefully this is a little less confusing than the previous one. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need a fifth one. I need hundreds of thousands. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, cool. Okay, so let's just fill in the numbers. So the first one was 10.11235, and the next one was 10.11090. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do, we're just going to compare those numbers. We start from left and we go to the right, and we see where we have the first difference between those two numbers. So here, the ones are the same, zeros are the same, ones are the same, ones are the same, and we have a look here in the thousandths column again. There is a difference between those two numbers. We've got a 2 and a 0, and what we want to do is compare them. Now, which one is bigger? Well, 2 is bigger than 0, so I'm just going to say that this first number is bigger than the second number. So what I'm going to write, 10.11235 and 10.11090. And what I know is the first number is bigger than the second one, so I'm going to write this symbol, greater than. So that tells me that the first number, this one here, is bigger than the one at the bottom, the next one. So when we're comparing decimals, what we want to do is we want to figure out, when we read it from left to right. Whichever one has a bigger number earlier on, so further to the left, it means that it's bigger than the next other one. Okay, so that's how we compare decimals. So that's the first thing we wanted to do in this lesson. Now, the second thing that we wanted to do was be able to actually convert decimals to fractions. Decimals and fractions are both used to write the same, represent the same number, but in two different ways. So what we want to do is we want to actually convert decimals to fractions. So the way that we do this, if we're going to start off by firstly converting from decimals to fractions. The first thing that we're going to do when we're doing this is we're just going to go through these steps. So let me show you the steps that we're going to do. Firstly, when we're converting from decimals to fractions, the first step we want to do is to count the number of decimal places used. So count up the number of decimal places used in your decimal. So we're figuring out how many digits there are after the decimal point. So after the decimal point, we just count up how many digits have they used. Okay, then from there, we want to divide by the corresponding power of 10. So powers of 10 are just numbers where they have 1 and a 0 after it, or 1 and any number of 0 after it. So 1 is a power of 10, 10 is a power of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. These are all examples of powers of 10. Okay, and then the final step is then we simplify the fraction if needed. So let's have a go at a few examples of this. So I've got this first one. Convert the following decimals to fractions in their simplest form. So A, I've got 0.725. 0.725. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to count up the number of decimal places used. So here, for this one, I've got, after the decimal point, I've got 1, 2, 3. And so that means that the smallest number that they have is in the, well, we've got tenths. This is my tenths. This is my hundredths. Oh, let me write it out a little bit bigger so you can see it. So this first 7 is my tenths. The next number is my hundredths. And the 5 is my thousandths. So here we've got 3 decimal places. Now, what we're going to do now here is, because we know that there's 3 decimal places, we're going to divide by the corresponding power of 10. The lowest one is the 5, which is that thousandths, which means that we're going to just divide this number by thousandths. So here, when I'm converting this, I'm just going to write, this is equal to 725 divided by 1,000. Because that's what the number of decimal places tell me. The number of decimal places tells me that the lowest decimal, the lowest place value is in the thousandths. So I'm going to divide by 1,000 here. Okay, I'm just going to erase this and move this out of the way. Okay, now that we've done that, we're going to simplify this fraction if possible. So here we're looking for a number that could go into both the top and the bottom. Now I happen to just know that this is actually 25. So 25 goes into both the top and bottom, and it goes into the top 29 times and goes into the bottom 1,000 40 times. Now you might be wondering, sir, I can't do that. I can't just get that number immediately out in my head. And that's fine. Not everyone can, and not everyone has a calculator inside their head. So I'm going to actually show you a quick way of doing this, and this is actually a way that you can do this on your calculator. So if you are needing to convert from decimals to fractions or fractions to decimals, I'm going to show you how you can do this. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I need to just fix up my calculator for a sec. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this decimal into my calculator. So I've got 0.725. 0.725, and I'm going to press equal. And so now my number pops up on my calculator. There's a button on my calculator that converts between my decimal and my fraction form. And this button, if you want to use your calculator, is this one. So calculator, we're going to use this button that looks like S, a two-sided arrow, and D. So if you have a look on your calculator, right above my delete button, there's this little S arrow, two-sided arrow to D button. So I'm going to press that. And what it does is actually converts your decimal into a fraction form and shows you the different, shows you it in fraction form. This S to D button actually just means in symbolic to decimal. So symbolic is just another way that so whoever's created the calculator has called our fraction version. And so here it actually changes it from fraction form to decimal form. And so if you're putting this in the calculator, you can just put this in the calculator and actually plop out that number for you. But we still want to get into the practice of actually doing this ourselves in our heads before we actually go and rely on our calculator for this. So that's our first example. Okay, now the second one. I've got B, which is 5.12. Now, first step that we do when we're converting from fractions to decimals is we count up the number of decimal points. So let me actually just go back. I want it further down. I'm going to count up the decimal points. So here, I'm going to go to my decimal point here, and I'm going to count from there. I've got 2 decimal points after. So here, just a reminder, this first one just represents tenths. The second 2 represents the hundredths. So what I'm going to actually need to do for this one is I need to divide by 100. Now notice that we've actually got this 5 before the decimal point. So if I've got 5 before a decimal point, that just means that there is a whole number. So anything before the decimal points are all whole numbers. So what we can actually do is we can write this as 5 outside of our fraction. And then we can just write the rest of our fraction, just like we did in the previous step, and divide by the relevant power of 10. Here, the relevant power of 10 would be 100 because we've got 2 decimal points. And so here, I'm going to be writing 12 over 100 because in my decimal, I've got this 2, which I can just write as 12 over 100. Okay, cool. Now that I've done that, I'm going to simplify this as best I can. So here, I'm going to simplify 12 over 100. I know that 4 goes into both 12 and 100, and it happens to go into 12 3 times, and it goes into 100 25 times. So that's how we can simplify or convert these decimals into fractions. So let's just check that we have this. Now here, I've got 5.12. I'm going to write this in SD. Now here, they've actually written it as an improper fraction. That's okay. I can just change it to mixed numeral like that. And so there we go. We've actually converted our decimals to a fraction. Okay. So that is how we convert from decimals to fractions. Now, we also want to be able to work the other direction. We want to go from a fraction and create a decimal. So let's actually go through what we need to do for that. So here, converting from fractions to decimals. So if we're converting from fractions to decimals, there's 2 steps I want you guys to do. First step, check. Check if the denominator is a power of 10. So if your denominator is a power of 10, what that means is, like I said before, does it have a 1 and a 0 behind it? So if it's only 1 and 0 behind it, then that is a power of 10. So 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and so on. Those are powers of 10. Okay. If not, we want to convert to a equivalent fraction, which is. So what we want to do is we want to convert our fraction to an equivalent fraction which has a denominator which is a power of 10. And we've gone through how to convert to equivalent fractions earlier in this topic. Then what we want to do is we want to write it directly in decimal form. We want to write it in directly in decimal form using our place value. So here, all we want to do is just use our place values, like we did with our place values, and then just write it as a decimal. So let's have a go at a few examples of this. First one here, A. So we've got 239 over 100. 239 over 100. Now, the bottom denominator here is our power of 10. Well, it's just a 1 followed by a whole bunch of zeros, so that is a power of 10. So 100 is a power of 10. All we need to do is just write it as a decimal using the place value. So here, I'm dividing by 100, which has 2 zeros. So that means I'm going into the second decimal point. So what I want to do is I just want to count 2 decimal points here and just put a dot where that would be, right before that. So here, this number would just be 2.39. Quite simple. Okay, that's the first example. Second one, 9 over 25. Let's have a look at the bottom. It's 25 a power of 10. Unfortunately, 25 is not a power of 10. But luckily for us, I know that 25 can multiply to become a power of 10. 25 is actually a quarter of 100. So what I can do is I can times this by 4, and that will give me 100. And so what I want to do is I want to create an equivalent fraction over 100. So here, I times the bottom by 4, so I need to times the top by 4. And so here, my number here is going to be 4 times 9 gives me 36. Now I've got a power of 10 at the bottom, and all I need to do is, just like we did before, use our place values and actually rewrite this as a decimal. So here we've got 2 zeros. I'm putting this in the 100th column. So what I want to do is I just want to get these 2 numbers. I put the decimal point here, and so this becomes 0.36. Now, if you don't have any number before the decimal point, what do we do? Well, if we don't have any number before the decimal point, we just write a 0 there. So if we don't have any number before the decimal point, we write a 0 there. And so that's how we convert fractions to decimals as well. So that's it for today's lesson. Let's just do a quick recap of what we talked about today in today's lesson. First thing that we talked about in today's lesson was what a decimal was. A decimal is just another way of writing numbers which are smaller than 1. And here we use a decimal point, and these can represent numbers that also can be written as fractions. The first thing that we did was we compared and ordered decimals. So what we had to do here was we had to just remember our place values. The further right you go, the smaller that place value becomes. And we just want to go from left to right and compare the value of each of those digits. Then we just want to write it as greater than or less than. Then from here, we actually converted decimals to fractions. So the first thing that we did was we converted decimals to fractions. And what we had to divide by the corresponding power of 10. And so we counted up the decimal points and the decimal places, and we noticed, okay, we just divide by whichever corresponding power of 10 we need. And then the final thing was we converted from fractions to decimals. We worked backwards, and what we had to do here was just rewrite our fraction with a power of 10 at the bottom, and then we could actually convert to a decimal quite quickly. So that's it for today's lesson. Hopefully that was hopefully you guys can have a go at a couple of the questions that were posted. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the Google Classroom or send me an email. I'm more than happy to try and help you guys. But as always, year 8s, I hope you guys are staying safe wherever you are. And until next lesson, I'll see you then. Bye.